Yo, 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 it's your boy Jehavian Goals, Vaughn, Savon, whatever you call it. I don't know what's the channel name, but it's my name right now. So just call me Vaughn. But yeah, we back. Get the mic a little closer to me. Come on. Yeah, we back with another video, and it's worst ways to die, man. And it sounded like 1,000 ways to die. We ain't watching that, but we back with the infographic show. We probably watch. Hey, just had a brain. We could watch 1,000 ways to die. I knew somebody used to watch it. It's a little old show back in like '09, '11. I don't know when that shit came out, but comment below if y'all remember 1,000 Ways to Die. It was some stupid shit how to die up there, but I used to watch that. But let's just get into the video. Quick little reaction. We ain't gonna do nothing too crazy today.
Armed to the teeth. They don't
How y'all been? How y'all been?
After 18 days close to the fort, they set up camp at Walnut Creek. The
loud.
atmosphere is tense, but there's excitement among the men. A big payday is soon to come. The military isn't too far away, so the men settle down for dinner and
I'm biting on this Chipotle. Y'all don't mind, right?
Suddenly, war cries fill the air.
Y'all hungry?
Shots are fired
Y'all
as
want?
the painted faces of the
Nah,
place
I'm a
of
little
Indians
hungry
rush around
today.
them. The swishing
Chipotle
sound
butter.
of arrows surround the boy's head. He watches in horror as men drop one by one.
Matter of
Turtle,
fact.
the leader, victoriously holds his arms aloft as he takes pride in looking at the
Matter of fact. I was gonna feed y'all, but I don't feel like it.
The Indians have no use for the flour. They burn all the wagons. They steal the horses. But they want something else to take back with them. They want scalps, and scalps they get. Some men are grievously injured after being hit with arrows, but it's the act of scalping that finishes them off. Not 2 hours after, a commanding officer and his men from Fort Larned arrive at the scene. Bodies are strewn everywhere, with the men noting their crooked postures, as if they died the most painful death a person could experience. The commander suddenly sees movement. He walks past the mutilated corpses to find 2 boys, one of them the orphan. They've been shot, they've been mutilated, they've been scalped, but somehow they're alive. Well, one of them lasts only a few hours after they reach the fort, but the other boy, a boy named Robert McGee, survives to tell the tale. As for his appearance, let's just say he'll turn heads throughout the rest of his days. It took some time for him to be well enough to talk about what happened, but when he was able, he described how he'd watched the Indians take the scalps from the men of his caravan. He said when it came to him, Little Turtle seemed to tell his tribe that he'd killed the boy himself. He then took out his gun and shot him and fired 2 arrows into him.
Ooh,
He's still conscious,
and them niggas still living. I know that pain hurt.
and the last thing he could remember was the force of the blade on his skull. So that bit of violence is a true story. Well, we say true, but there are different versions of it. The boy's fate became legend, and then, as things tend to happen, legends mutate. The kid definitely got scalped, and that massacre definitely happened, but there are different
I know his
slants to the
shit.
tale.
I know
Just to be clear, some
he
of the
was
stories
pushing
say
his
the army
shit
watched from
back,
a
his
distance as the
headline
massacre
and his
happened.
head.
That legend
Damn.
happened, since the 15th Kansas Volunteer Cavalry Commander was charged with cowardice. We found a news clipping from the Great Bend Weekly Tribune, dated 1906, which states 15 white men and 2 Negroes were butchered, but the latter 2 guys didn't lose their scalps. It also says this: because he had no hair to lift, his head was virtually skinned, the entire scalp being torn off after an incision had been made in the forehead.
Them Indians was
around
playing
40
no
ears
joke.
and back to the nape of the neck. Looking at the history books, it seems it was the Scythians who took discalping first. Their first kingdom popped up in the 7th century BC, and they can be found in present-day Russia, Ukraine, Mongolia, and some of the stands, a bit of China, and part of Eastern Europe. In the 5th and 4th century BC, they started trading with the Greeks, and so it's through the Greek historian named Herodotus that we know a bit about their proclivity to skin a person's head. According to Herodotus, a Scythian warrior would kill a man in battle, and then keep the head. That was proof of a kill, which gained him some status. But there was more to it than that. He would cut around the skin so that when he shook the head, the skull would be released. It would still have bits of flesh stuck to the skin, so the guy would give it a good old scraping with the rib of an ox. When the skin was cleared, he might use it as a handkerchief, or just tie it on his horse as an adornment, which showed others he was a mighty warrior.
No, I just noticed.
A lot of them. As you'll see later, drying out scalps and keeping
Watching
them as
this
a badge
shit,
of
but look, I said react to 1,000 Ways to Die, and it just popped up in my head. YouTube is not gonna allow that shit.
Happened many years
Hey,
later in other
one
places.
day, no one steal my idea, but I'm gonna
Scalping
tell
barrels
y'all,
back in
cause
the 3rd century.
no one's
One skull
listening.
that was excavated showed that a
I'll
woman
probably
in
make
Germany
something
back
like
then was hit
YouTube.
3 times on the head,
Mark
and
my
then someone
words.
cut off her scalp. Why? No one knows. Now let's go to England in the 11th century and the Anglo-Saxons that ruled there. Harold II was the last of the Anglo-Saxon kings because in 1066 those formidable Norman conquerors.
Hey, like, if back then, like, niggas used to probably go crazy with the torturing, bro. You say something crazy, they chopping off your legs with the axe and shit, throwing some salt in your shit. You done.
Came over and took him out with an arrow to the eye. That's the legend, anyway. His father, Earl Godwin, was apparently good with a knife and was a keen proponent of scalping. Sometimes
This
he
Chipotle hit, and I'm sorry, man. I was trying to wait till after the video, but
occasionally
the
he took
nigga
their
ain't eating
scalp.
on no
An
thing.
ancient manuscript proves that it should be included in the worst
I
ways
was
to
gonna
die.
feel with y'all,
Bearing in
but you
mind
know,
that what we just said about blinding and maiming, that very odd
don't really
chronicle
feel
said
like it.
about scalping, no more horrible deed was done in this country. The son of Ethelred the Unready, Alfred Etheling, was always caught up in power struggles. According to the manuscripts, he was captured by Earl Godwin. He was put in a boat and sent to an island, but then when he got there, they tore out his eyes, and some say he was scalped.
Damn.
Some monks took pity on him, but he died not long after. That's the thing with scalping injuries. If the initial injury doesn't kill you, the blood loss or ensuing infection will. As for Etheling's men, this was written about them.
And that's when the pain coming, like,
some he put
hey,
in fetters and afterwards.
Alright, you see some painful deaths, like niggas, like, alright, it was one, like, you know, like the casket, nigga get put in a casket and throw it in the dirt. Like, nigga would rather just die because you in there, you can't breathe, it's hurting. Or like, one thing, I seen this on Archer, bro. He had like the water clogged on him. He was like, it ain't hurt, it ain't hurt. But that shit probably do hurt. Like, you put the water towel on it and they pour water on your face. That shit probably is painful.
Tortured by scalping and punished by cutting off their hands and feet. Many also he ordered to be sold, and he killed by various and miserable deaths 600 men at Guildford. Before we get back to North America, let's talk a bit more about scalping in general. One of the reasons people took scalps was because heads were bulky. You can hardly take back 11 heads just to show off how well you've done on the battlefield. Logistically, on horseback, 11 heads just doesn't work out. As for how scalping was done, well, it wasn't always an exact science, and it depended on how much of the scalp a person wanted. It also depended on how long the person's hair was. After someone had cut the skin with a knife or another tool, they used the hair to pull off the scalp. It would have been hard scalping a bald man. With a sharp enough knife and a good bit of hair to grab hold of, the scalp would have come right off. In the old world, they sometimes had to use seashells for cutting, or flint, or sharp stones. Fortunately for the victims, scalping often happened when they were already dead, or very close to it. So now, let's talk about the long history of American scalping. It's been said before that Europeans brought scalping to North America, which is not true in the slightest. You already know that scalping in Europe happened many centuries ago, but Native Americans were also scalping back then. We can look at something called the Crow Creek Massacre that happened in 1325 or thereabouts, somewhere close to the Missouri River. Groups belonging to the initial coalescent culture had already been fighting there for some time. Anyway, an excavation there discovered the remains of almost 500 people. These were villagers and included men, women, and children. Some people had their limbs cut off, tongues cut out, or were beheaded. 90% of them had been scalped, although the children's heads were cut higher than the men's and women's. When the first explorers from Europe arrived in the 16th century, they talked about the Indians scalping Indians in parts of present-day Mexico, what's now Florida, and also in Canada. In 1535, Jacques Cartier talked about how he'd been introduced to a tribe in what's now called Montreal. He said he was shown scalps of their enemies drying out in the sun. In 1540, the first European expeditioner lost his scalp near Appalachian Bay. His name was Simon Rodriguez. Then, when the first British colonists arrived in the early 17th century, they started paying native tribes to kill other tribes that were hostile to them. Proof of a kill was a scalp. Some of the tribes had aligned with the colonists and were doing trade with them, while others, notably the Pequot, were not aligned. This led to the Pequot War. Then there's the famous story of a woman named Hannah Dustin, aka the mother of the American tradition of scalp hunting. On March 15, 1697, her town in Massachusetts was raided by around 30 men from the Abenaki tribe. 27 of those townspeople, mostly just kids, were killed.
Damn.
Dustin was taken captive along with her newborn child. The tribe swung that child by the legs against a tree and made
These
her
niggas is
After that,
savage.
Dustin and other captives were being held by another tribe, and you could say not treated very well. One
Damn,
night,
what
while
are
the
these
captors
ads
were
popping
sleeping, Dustin and others attacked
At least
the
it ain't
tribe's
30 second
members.
ad.
Dustin herself used a hatchet to kill 2 men, 2 women, and 6 children. She also
That
took
bitch
their
was
scalps
going
as proof, and
ballistic.
after returning to friendly territory,
Bitch
she
like
received
Trevor from
£25
GTA.
in bounty money. Suffice to say, there was a lot of scalping going on back then. Sometimes the colonists would do the scalping themselves, and sometimes they'd pay native tribes to do the scalping for them. When the British and French
All
North
this
America,
scalping, they
they
ain't
both
had no
made
dog
natives for
tags?
scalps of anyone aligned to
Nah,
the
I'm
opposite
joking with
sides.
y'all.
Acts were
We
even
know
introduced
they
in
ain't
both
had no
countries,
dog
which made it
tags.
law that bounties could be given for scalps. Meanwhile, the colonists were still fighting the natives. In 1756, Lieutenant Governor Robert Morris of Pennsylvania wrote in a declaration 130 pieces of 8 for the scalp of every male Indian enemy above the age of 12 years, 50 pieces of 8 for the scalp of every
Damn.
Indian woman, produced as evidence of their being killed. Paying money for scalps, of course, got some entrepreneurial people thinking. Some of them robbed newly dug graves and scalped the deceased, hoping to get a bounty. There's also evidence of the Church of Ministers putting
So
together
they was
scalping
just
gangs.
scalping
In
niggas.
an
That's
article
it is a
published in the
painful
American
way.
Historical Review, it was written policymakers offered bounties for Native American heads or scalps in at least 23 states of their colonial, territorial, or
Damn,
Mexican
niggas was going
antecedents.
crazy
In
back then.
1763, the Scots-Irish frontiersmen called the Paxton Boys committed an atrocity that's gone down in history. They brutally slaughtered 20 Susquehannock men, women, and children and took their scalps. And it was the sermons of a holy man that ignited the violence. The people who were killed had not provoked any of the settlers at all, and they'd lived peacefully with settlers in the past. In the 1800s, the mercenary John Glanton scalped 500 Indians in Mexico and made a lot of money from it. He was also scalped and killed himself a bit later by a native tribe he'd been in a rivalry with. During the American Civil War, Bloody Bill Anderson mutilated and scalped Union troops, at least one time under the watch of a young Jesse James. Entire families were sometimes scalped. In the 19th century, 1 woman and 6 children were scalped by Indians in Madison County, Illinois. It's now known as the Wood River Massacre. This was horrific, but you have to remember that during the early to mid 19th century,
Niggas was
American
going
troops
crazy. All I
gangs
hear
killed
is
and scalped
scalping.
hundreds of natives. In 1867, the New York
Nigga
Times
pulling
wrote
that shit
settlers in
back.
Colorado were offering this,
But that shit ain't
$25
funny,
each
man.
to be
That
paid
shit
for
might be
scalps with the
painful.
years on. When did the scalping stop in this bloody
Yeah, when
era
did
of
the
North
scalping
American
stop?
history?
Cause all I'm hearing
Well,
is
we're not exactly
niggas
sure,
scalping.
but as
I
late
thought we
as
was gonna get like
1864,
multiple
one of
shit,
the worst
but
atrocities against Native
damn.
Americans happened. This was the Sand Creek Massacre in Colorado. 675 men from the 3rd Colorado Cavalry rode into a Cheyenne and Arapaho village and killed at least 150 people, most of them women and children and the elderly. They mutilated the bodies and took the scalps as trophies. We'll finish with an English railroad worker named William Thompson. In 1867, he and others were on a train going to Nebraska. His job there was to fix a broken telegraph wire. On the way, a group of about 30 Cheyenne attacked them. The train derailed, and he and the rest in that car were attacked. Thompson was shot in the shoulder and lost his scalp, but he survived. Legend has it, the pain was so much he fainted, but when he came around, he saw his scalp next to him. This was unusual.
Damn,
because
that.
scalps were usually
Oh
used
my
as
god.
trophies.
So he
When
just
helped
they
the
cut his
Indians
shit
to a
off
doctor
and
who
he's still
unsuccessfully
living.
tried to reattach the scalp. By this time, his head was already dangerously infected. He ended up taking the scalp back to England with him, but it didn't garner much interest. Because of that, he sent it back to the U.S. where it stayed. It's now in a special box at the W. Dale Clark Library in Omaha. It's probably the last surviving scalp.
Damn.
Now you need to watch Skinned Alive, Worst Ways to Die, or have a look at this.
Oh, they said Scout Worst Ways to Die. What? We watched it, man. Scout, man, and we ain't gonna watch this. Yeah, man. Yeah, we watched a little Scout. I don't really what I was looking for, but I was like, hey, rather well watch the whole thing. But yeah, man, your boy Vaughn out, man. Holla at me, man. Follow my trading view, Jhavian Goals. Follow my Instagram, Jhavian _. And yeah, man, we out.